All right, so today I'm going to do a few labs to reinforce the topic on the security that we had last week. We couldn't have a session last week because the class had to be canceled, so I'm going to go over a couple of the items, especially on identity of your user. One of the major goals of the security environment uh, is confidentiality, integrity, availability, and the key element of that goal is to make sure that the right person have access to the right data. That's really confidentiality. That's what it's about. Making sure that the right person have access to the right data or resources at the right time. So to that end, we're going to be considering one of the topics under the identity. I want to show you this deck slide, and I'll quickly explain how this works. In the cloud environment, we're going to be using Azure cloud platform. You have something similar as well in other cloud platforms as well, but I want to just show you the whole idea of management, or should I call managed service identity, is that you can use a code or a machine or application or web app can actually request or access a resource without actually using a password or a user account. So this is how that works. If you look at this flow, the first thing that happens is and we will demonstrate this in our lab shortly after this short deck slide, is that you initiate that an identity be created for this virtual machine, not for code. The code is inside the virtual machine, and is going to request using orchestrator to Azure Resource Manager, ARM, and say I need an identity. And what ARM is going to do, ARM is going to call the MSI access service, who is going to call the Azure tenant itself, and said, I would like you to create a service principal for a machine. Service principal, every user account have what they call SPN, which is like service principal name. A layman way of describing that would be, saying every human being have a social security number. All right. So when you grant a user account permission or grant them to a particular role, you're actually granting them to the service principal. All right. So we establish an identity for this machine. We set up or create a service principal name. The MSI as a service is going to make sure that the identity is established with the service principal. In other words, it's going to identify the identity with all the necessary metadata. Part of it could be service principal name and so on and so forth, client ID, certificate. Now, the Azure Resource Manager is also going to create two entities. Number one, the client ID, and secondly, certificate. What is going to happen now, you have established an identity with a service principal. This identity does not have any access to anything. So you're going to have to use a role-based access control, RBAC, to grant this identity access to a particular resource. It could be a file server, it could be database, it could be key vault, and so on and so forth. You will grant that particular identity access to resource that you want to grant them. Once that is done, then the virtual machine, having been granted the right access, can then request for a token. A token is going to be requested from IMDS, that is an instance metadata service endpoint. Now, if you look at this line, it's kind of a little bit tiny, but this endpoint here is accessible by every VM in Azure and is located, you can see the IP address is a non-routable 169.254. Every virtual machine have access to this endpoint. And on this endpoint, you have access to several plugins. One of them is identity, endpoint, there is a storage endpoint, there is network endpoint, and is actually requesting token to access a particular resource. But at this point, it's just asking IMDS, can I get a token? And in this case, is sending that request to identity endpoint on the Azure Instance Metadata Service. Now, once this request is received by the IMDS, IMDS is actually going to ultimately send that request to the Azure tenant, okay, along with the client ID, the certificate, the SPN as the service principal name. Azure AD tenant is going to issue out access token. Getting this access token, this machine now is going to use that access token to access the resources. It could be SQL, it could be storage, it could be Key Vault. That is really the entire process. It's a very, very simple process. You initiate identity to be created for, virtual machine. That's a recap now I'm doing. That is going to be initiated by the orchestrator through ARM, that's Azure Resource Manager, who is going to leverage MSI as a service, send a request to Azure tenant. Service principal will be created. The MSI as a service is going to establish identity with all the necessary metadata. In other words, linking the identity with the service principal. Azure Resource Manager will then create client ID and certificate. The VM, having the identity now with the appropriate access, or even doesn't even need the access at this point, is going to request for a token from Azure Instance Metadata Service. There are various endpoints on this. One of them is identity, could be storage, could be network. It's saying, give me a token. IMDS is going to send a request and obtain, an access token from the Azure tenant, and then it's going to use that token to access the, service. If this identity has been given the right access, then it will get a success back. If not, it will be denied. So that's really the entire process. What advantage do we get from here? We get, essentially ability to automatically rotate our key management, automatic identity lifecycle management, automatic service identity creation. In other words, all these things, you don't have to worry about doing it anymore. Your password, the user account, everything, it's all managed. And of course, it's free. One good thing about this is now you can run a code and you don't have to add code your credential, like your username and password, inside the code that you want to run. So if somebody were to get hold of your code, they will not be able to see your credential by having access to it. All right. So having said that, let's quickly get into the lab and do a little bit of a test. I have a Linux VM created here. It's a Linux Ubuntu 16. If you want to, essentially, let me go back here. So this is my virtual machine. I'm in Azure now. Select my Linux box here, and I go to identity. If I click identity, this is where you go to create, to enable, identity for this virtual machine. And this is what I was showing you in this diagram here. This is your number one here. By clicking that button, I'm going to ask Azure Resource Manager through Orchestrator to create identity for this VM, create a service principal, establish identity, and link it up with all the necessary metadata. That is all going to happen. 1, 2, and 3 is going to happen with just this click of the mouse. When I do this one, click Save, and it's telling me Linux will be registered with Azure directory. And once it's registered, it can be granted permission and so on and so forth. By registering it, you're creating identity for it, service principal name, and all that kind of stuff. Good stuff. So now I'm saving it. One thing I also want to mention to you is this identity is tied to this Linux VM. Once this Linux VM is deleted, this system assigned identity would also automatically be deleted. So that's one of the advantages. Now you don't have to worry about maintaining your credentials, identity, and making sure everything is deleted. Once the VM is gone, this identity is also gone. Now, we have done this. We've created this one. The next stage for us now is to actually go ahead and try and let's see if we can demonstrate how we're going to request for token by this machine. I'm going to go over to my VM here, virtual machine here, select my Linux. I'm going to go to connect. It's a Linux box, so I'm going to select this box, this IP address. If you want to do it externally or internally, you can drop down this box and select private IP, but I'm going to connect externally. Copy this, and you can open up your shell here. Another thing you can also do is you can actually come over here and use your PowerShell. You can either use your PowerShell, or I can use my shell in Azure environment here. That will do it for you as well. Or if you don't want to do that, you can simply come over here, bring up your better now. I'm going to expand this screen, and I can just do this. It's asking for password. I'm going to enter my password, and just like that, I've logged on into this, Linux VM. So I'm going to clear up my screen here, and the first thing I'm going to do, and I enter, I have this URL that I'm going to provide for you, and it walks you guys through it. I made some modification to make your life a little easier. The first thing you do is you create an identity, which I've already done. The next thing you will do is to grant access. And then the last thing you want to do is to then access a resource. I'm going to intentionally skip one of the access, and then you would see how that works out. Okay? All right, so if you go down here, I'm skipping this granting access, requesting access here for a very reason. I want to show you why having an identity doesn't give you much if you do not have access given to that identity. You can just click copy here, and if you click copy here, you drop that over here. Now, let me see if I can expand the, increase this font one more time. There you go. It's more clearer now. So let me walk you guys through what this command is actually doing. So when I say curl, of course you know curl is almost the same thing with wget, except that you can use curl with several other protocols, with HTTP, FTP, SFTP, and so on and so forth. Wget, is what you use to crawl a website, but you can also use it for more functionality as far as website is concerned. So wget will give you deeper functionality for web server, but it's not broad. You can only use it for HTTP, whereas curl has much wider range, but not as much in depth when it comes to HTTP. All right, so we're using curl here. I'm calling this URL, and you can see 169.254. Anytime you see 169.254, it's a non-routable IP address, and it's calling this Azure Instance Metadata Service. Inside this metadata service, you have several endpoints. Identity is one of them. So we're calling identity endpoint on this Instance Metadata Service, and I'm saying I would like you to get me a token, okay? And who are you talking to here? You're actually talking to Azure itself, management.azure. You're talking to Azure and say, I would like you to get me a token to access this particular resource. Okay? All right. So I'm going to go ahead and press enter here. And you can see it prints out the entire thing. Access token, tells you when your token expires, and so on and so forth. A whole lot of information here. Now, ultimately, if you look at the link I gave you here, they told you here, when you come over here, this is your response, we already got it. They wanted to now use this token that you get to call your resources, which is Azure itself. Of course, this is going to work as long as you belong to this resource group. Now you're going to copy the access token that was generated here, which is here, this access token. You're going to copy it, and then insert it at the end of your access token. No, so over here you're going to say bearer space, and then you're going to copy your access token here. Now obviously this is kind of very messy, and that's what I want to show you clearly here. You will see what I'm going to do on the screen here. I'm going to parse this access token into a more or less like a variable placeholder. So here I'm going to come here and I'm going to use this instead. Say it's exactly the same thing that I'm doing here. The same command that I type up here is what I'm doing up here, except that now I'm passing this output into a variable placeholder called response. So I'm going to type the same thing, except that now I wrap everything up, in a parenthesis, run it, put $sign in front of it to make it a variable, and then pass everything inside the response. So I'll do the same thing here. So pass it out now, and just like that you can see. Now you can see that it didn't print out anything on the screen. That's because I'm parsing the variable into my variable placeholder called response. I can echo the content out, and you will see the content now. Response, as you can see, it's in there. Now I have a place to hold it, a placeholder, and it makes things a little bit easier for me. I can clear up the screen, which I'm going to do just to make things a little bit easier. So I have my placeholder here. The next thing I'm going to do is, and I will run you through this page again. Now I will extract my access token. See, these as access token and a whole lot of other information, expiration, and so on and so forth that I don't need. So I just want to extract my access token, and I will use this command line to take care of that. So what I'm doing here, I'm creating another variable placeholder here called access token, and then I'm echoing, spitting out the content of this response, which is what you have on the screen here, and I'm piping it into Python, and then I'm calling two module, import sys, which is one of the module, and I'm importing a JSON module into my Python, and then I say print it using this format, JSON, and then the payload. And I'm saying use a standard system input, and I'm saying look at this field. I wanted to extract this field out for me, because this thing has several fields, and one of the field here is access token, as you can see it up here. So this is going to extract access token for me. All the other field that I'm not interested in is going to leave them out. So I'm going to come over here now, copy this, so I have this now. My mouse is sort of not working. I'm going to parse it right now. If you want to see the content again, you can go back into type echo, and you can go to dollar access underscore token, and now you can see I've extracted just the token out. Okay, started from EY here. I've extracted it out, leaving out all the expiration information, all the other artifacts or metadata that's not important to me. I call it token. Now you can copy this if you really want to parse it out here. You can copy these out, copy, and go to a website. The URL of this website is jwt.ms. JWT, that's JavaScript Web Token .ms. JWT.ms. If you copy and paste your token here, it will parse your token for you. And it can tell you it's Java's web script token. And if you want to understand what this field really means, go to claims, and it's going to explain it for you, so you could see what each of these token means. You can explore it, view it. I totally recommend that you play around with it when you get the chance. And then look at it. It said this token was issued by Azure Active Directory. So it's very clear. So this thing that we're printing on the screen here, it might not make a lot of sense, but any application or any back-end API or application that knows how to consume token would understand the content of this file. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do here, I'm going to bring this screen up here, is I'm going to go ahead and use this token. But before I use this token, I want to demonstrate to you that this token is only good if you have access. You can get a token that is no good. For example, if I run, I'm going to use this token now, and I want you to understand what it is that I have done so far. Is now I am creating a construct. This is just a construct. You can type all this thing manually, but you're going to have a very long command line. I'm creating a construct, URL construct, and say http management.azure subscription. Let me show you quickly how I got my subscription. Because if you look on the URL I gave you here, which I'm going to give you later, so look at it, they're going to ask you to include your subscription here. And of course, your resource group here as well. You're going to need both of those. How do you get them? That's very easy. If you go to your VM here, you can easily see your subscription here and just copy it here. And then, of course, your resource group, you can also see your resource group very much easily, simply by looking at it over here. Here's my resource group here. You can copy them. And when you copy them, you pass them back inside your command. All right? Here is your command now. For me, I've replaced that here. Okay? Now, look at this. This virtual machine belongs to a resource group metro state. I'm going to try and use this token to access a resource for another resource group, IAM. Again, take a look. Metro state, IAM. I'm going to set up a construct, which is what I'm doing. But then I'm using it for a resource group in IAM that this machine does not belong to. So I'm going to do that. Let's go back here. Okay. So I've created a construct here. And then the next thing I'm going to do finally is to come over here, and then I'm going to use this. Let's see what it says. See, it says does not have authorization to perform action. See? Why? Because this virtual machine here only belongs to a resource group of Metro. It doesn't belong to a resource group that I actually was trying to make it access to. See? It doesn't belong here. Now, I can come over here and then come to hard role and give this guy access to it. Okay, so here is a machine right now. Call it peace. Go to identity. Turn on the managed service identity for it. Once this is done, then I can go on and grant it permission to any entity. And you see the screenshot is right over here for you, so you can really go through all these if you so desire at any point in time. So I just simply come over here. You can go over your subscription as you have on my screen here, and I can select it, go to Azure Resources Access Control Management over here, and give this guy a read. Select virtual machine, and you can see the machine here piece that I just installed. and give it a save. You want to make sure you wait until this moving arrow is completed. That way you know everything is set up and everything is good to go. And you will leverage what I've shown you guys earlier on as well. And feel free to use this code as needed. The most important thing is you request token, you pass your token, you use your token. But in between requesting for token, remember there's one step that I intentionally skip here, which is grant access first. Otherwise you'll be requesting for a token that doesn't have access. Alright, so grant access to VM. That's the first thing you do, and then request for token. So again, I'm going to come over here. Let's see if this one is still going for some reason. I can go to my virtual machine, select this, and go to connect. And of course you already have your command here, and that is the command you're going to use. Let's see if I can connect to it. You may not be able to connect to it if the machine is still being provisioned, so just so you're aware of that. In which case you just wait, type yes, ask me to type my password, press enter here, and I'm in. And the next time you try to log on, it's not going to try to do the fingerprint anymore. I'm going to clear my screen. So we have granted this machine access. So the next thing we're going to do is to request a token and pass that token into a placeholder here. Okay, passing into a placeholder, and I've told you you can look at the content of what you have here. $response. Now I need to extract it. The command to extract is a little bit easier if you're in Windows, if you're using Python, and I can actually have some other ways of extracting these as well. We'll probably talk a little bit about that later on. So come over here. I've extracted the access token out of it, and then I can define a URL link. Okay. Again, I'm just defining it so that way when I want to type the body of my authorization request, I don't have to type a whole long string. And now I can just leverage that and just use this. And this command is relatively straightforward. Okay. This command is relatively straightforward. Is the access token that I created over here, a placeholder that I'm calling it here. Alright. And it's a URL that I define over here that I'm calling over here. Alright. So if I come over here and I press enter, and what do you see now? You can see that it succeeded. It succeeded. Why? Because I had come over here first and gave this piece, access control. If I didn't, then it will probably fail. Alright? Hope you find this useful. I will go ahead and create some additional video, and then we're gonna look at it a little bit more in detail. This is just for requesting a token to access a Azure Resource Manager. Okay, we're going to look at the same thing to access a storage. We're going to look at the same thing for web application. We're going to use the same thing for other resource. As you can see, the whole idea is that this virtual machine over here piece is requesting for a resource without actually having to use a username and password. That is the whole idea, that I can configure a client and a resource to communicate and not having to use username and password, so there is nothing for the bad guys to steal. Thank you.